The theme, dessert party. The time limit, 1 hour. How did I make a scene in Blender within that time frame? How did I even get out not one, but two renders because my render time was less than 30 seconds? For context, this was a short, fun render challenge on Cody Gindy's and Tradigital's Discord server. Now, I didn't happen to record my screen during the competition, but I can walk you through the file to show you what I did, as well as some things that I did to polish the render after the competition. So this is the scene, and so let's start with the star of the render, the M&M. And so I have this main collection, M&M, and I have a few things. I have actually a proxy mesh, which is only 320 triangles, and I'll even toggle the proxy thanks to Proxy Plus. So we got the high proxy mesh right here, as well as the low proxy mesh. So I actually did this during the competition because I was worried that the mesh complexity would make a big difference with the render of my viewport speed. Turns out it didn't really in this case, but I do think it's always a good idea to think of proxies and viewport speed from the beginning and not just when you run into problems. And so for the M, I actually did some tracing with this. And so there's a subdivision, and I literally just drew. And so I actually followed the M&M logo. Now, what I did for the competition wasn't this nice. I actually kind of speed ran this tracing, and for the render then it wasn't as much of a big deal, but I kind of wanted to make it look much better this time around. I just basically took the image, traced it, and then moved this mesh back onto the M&M. Turn off the reference. And so with this collection, I was able to instance it throughout my scene using the same mesh over and over again, saving lots of memory. And I did this with geometry nodes. Bring back the rest of the scene. We all got all these M&Ms here. They're jumping up and down. Now, if I turn off the geometry nodes, look what it is. It's just a plane. Now, you notice it's actually slanted a little bit. I actually did that to take up more space in the screen. So if I actually move these back down, you notice it kind of flattens it out a little bit, and you don't get to see as much of the M&Ms. And so I use the slanted backdrop to kind of get more M&Ms into the screen and kind of make it seem like there's a bigger crowd. Now you're thinking, Spencer, what kind of complex geometry node setup did you do for this competition? Well, prepare to be slightly disappointed. It's about a dozen nodes. Let me see, 3, 6, 18. So this is 18 nodes in total. And I would say probably this part was really all I had for the competition during that 1 hour. And I'll walk through really quick of what it does. First, we subdivide the mesh. And so then I do set position. And so I'm just displacing this subdivided mesh up and down. And that's what makes the M&Ms jump. I wanted to make sure that you could kind of still see some of their faces. And I kind of wanted to make sure that was apparent and kind of had that feeling of kind of a live party going on. So I added that displacement. And then from there was really just a distribute points on faces. These points are really big. I will note that this is done in a real world scale. So the M&Ms are like literally multiple millimeters wide. So I use the, I don't know how to pronounce this, poisson disk. But basically it's noise, but then it tries to remove points afterward. So that way there's a set distance, a minimum distance between each of the points. So I kind of added a little bit just that way no M&Ms are clipping. Just that, and then instance on points. And then all I did was a collection info and just added the M&M. That's it. And then I did add some random rotation. That was basically just to make sure that they just all weren't facing the exact same direction. And then after the competition, I did have them by default looking towards the main M&M. So that way they were all looking towards the same direction towards him and then slightly offsetting for each of them. So yeah, with geometry nodes, don't feel like it has to be just this some mind-boggling mystical thing. Like just start with the distribute points on faces, instance on points. And from those two, you can instance things, and it's a lot of saved memory just from that. And then you can just build off of that from there. I will say geometry nodes is also a good stepping stone into programming as well, because a lot of the concepts that you learn from geometry nodes of how they work can be directly applied to programming. Now let's look at this main M&M. You'll notice the color is different. So this is the material color, by the way. I could have just done a instance, but the problem is I didn't want to have this instance be the same crowd colors as this. I wanted to be able to guarantee a red M&M for the DJ. So for this, I just took the instance, I'll recreate it. So I just had this instance, as you can see right here, and then I just did Control A. There's a make instances real. I actually go over this in my CG Cookie course, link in the description. This is one of my favorite operators because you could do instances for everything, but then for maybe the couple cases where you want to manipulate them a little more, you make it real. And now I can do whatever I want with it. I can split the individual pieces and all that. It's really nice. I really like this operator. Not well known and very underutilized in my opinion. With this M&M, I actually took away the proxy. I think I did that after the challenge, just because I didn't really need it in this case. You'll notice the mesh data is still linked, but I overrided the material. And so normally it's this data one, and that's the main M&M color. But then I set it to object, so that way this object material can be different from the default one on the mesh. So this is a great way if you have multiple instances of an object, you can give them different materials. It's great. Then with shading, I'll show you the node tree very quickly. Yes, this is a group node, so it is deceiving, but even then, it's not that complicated. It's just a principal BSDF, and they add a slight bump. And that's just with a noise texture, and I scaled it down really small because when working with real values and really small M&Ms, you gotta tone it down. And I just used the noise texture. So that's the DJ's color. Now, if we go back to the mesh data color, you'll see it's the same exact shader, but I just added a color ramp that uses random. So let me go here. I use view layers as well. We'll get to that in a second. And so if I preview the random, as you can see, it makes a random value for each object in the scene, and this includes instances. So it goes from 0 to 1. And I just take that 0 to 1 random number and put it through a color ramp, and it changes the color. And then I just apply it to the PBR shader, works perfectly. So this is an easy way of adding variation to instances, is just using this material, adding an object link when needed, but otherwise just using color ramps or random to add some variation. Alrighty, now what we're here for with optimization, let's go over render settings. Now actually, it's not that interesting to be honest with the main render settings. So I kept the max samples pretty low, 512. The deep noise threshold is 0.01, 0.02, I think is what I used during the competition. But people don't realize how useful this noise threshold is, because it could just be that I just put this to 4096. But basically, per sample, Blender will check itself of, do we need to go more? How high is the noise for this pixel? And if it's below that threshold, then Blender's like, we're done with that pixel. Let's move on. I'd say this noise threshold is sometimes more important. So do the max samples for as much as you need for the really complex areas, and then noise threshold to make the less complex areas go on faster. But in this case, this is a pretty simple scene. The shaders are very simple. The lighting is very simple. So there's very little lighting artifacts or noise or fireflies that I ran into. So for the most part, it was quick. And of course, denoising, open image denoise, have everything on high, using the GPU because I can. I didn't mean that like in a downplaying way of like, hey, you don't have a GPU. I was just saying because I can use the GPU, I should use the GPU every chance I can. Same goes for in the performance tab, the compositor, make sure you have the GPU if you can. And of course, up here, device, GPU. And then let's talk color space, actually. So in the color space down here, I'm actually using the Render Raw add-on. I'll get to that in a second. But the view transformer I'm using is the Chronos PBR neutral. So this is actually pretty new in Blender. But basically what it does is it makes the colors, it's pretty similar to standard, but it just handles oversaturation better. This is great for trying to have colors relatively consistent. With M&Ms, you gotta have the colors right. So I wanted to make sure I was doing that, because if I did AGX, it's more realistic, but it does tend to desaturate the brighter colors, similar to what film does. That's why it's called AGX. So in this case, I used Chronos, PBR neutral. But there's an add-on called Render Raw. It's by CG Cookie. I would highly recommend this. I actually bought this add-on before I worked with CG Cookie, so it's not even from that. I'm not affiliating or sponsoring them at all. But I would highly recommend this add-on because it simplifies compositing to just tweaks in a panel. I love it. I'll show you what I did. So I don't think I did anything for the values. Oh, did I? I don't recall doing anything with values. Anyway, we'll leave that untouched then. So I did some color boost, and during the competition, I used the hue to adjust and color correct the colors. You can kind of see it there. There you go. And so while this does work well, you have to be careful that some areas get too saturated that are close to it. This is actually what I ran into of, well, it looked good during the competition. Afterwards, I realized that this was actually messing with some of the colors in ways I didn't want to. Then with Render Raw, my favorite part of it is that it adds easy settings for lens distortion, lens dispersion, glare. Let's look at that glare. That looks so nice. Vignette and film grain. You thought that was just noise? You probably did. That's okay. So I added a little bit of that digital noise back because with a DJ selfie, it's probably going to be an overexposed picture, and so there's more likely to be noise. And so that's why I raised it in this case. Anyways, I really love this add-on. I actually have an old video of compositing color grading on this channel. It's actually one of my more popular ones. I actually plan on redoing that video because a lot has changed since then. With Blender 4.5 coming out this summer, I want to go over it again and kind of show my updated process. My CPU is throttled, but let's see my render time. So, alrighty. And the view layers I added after the competition, but I'll show you how that works as well. So my last time was 25 seconds, so that's just a comparison. So with Render Raw, it actually renders in raw color space, and then it will do the conversion in compositing. So this allows it to be able to do better color grading. That's why it looks drastically different. 29 seconds, even with the throttling, it's still below. So let me show the view layers and why I have it set up like that. So I have my view layers. If you remember my view layer tutorial, if you haven't seen it, I would highly recommend watching it. But in this case, I just have a holdout on the DJ, so it's just masked. It's just masked out. I have this transparent as well. And then, with that, I have my DJ by himself. So he's checked. Actually, most of them are checked, like my lighting is checked. But for the dance floor in the crowd, I set it to indirect only. So it still affects the lighting of my DJ, but they're separated out of this render. Let's go to the compositing tab. Now, of course, Render Raw is doing most of the work. It pre-makes this node group, so you don't touch it, you just adjust it in the panels. But in this case, so I did this part after the challenge. Before, I was having it all in one render, but I wanted to be able to fix some of these colors. So in this case, so I had the alpha over, so it's a transparent background, so I want to make sure it's black. And I added the M&M back. Oh, it's blue because I forgot to switch back the object data. I'll do that again in a second. And then I would correct the hue. So let me fix that DJ. And only 500 megabytes of memory too. This is a pretty small file. This will be available on Patreon. I would normally put it on Ko-Fi, but because M&M is a copyrighted thing, I can't put it on there as a file. So I'm not going to be one that's going to put a bunch of stuff on Patreon. But if you'd like to support me, you can either purchase my products. If you'd like to donate, I would recommend Ko-Fi because Ko-Fi takes the least out of the donation for me and my Patreon. But yeah, so you see this red M&M. Now, if I went before the hue correct, let's go to my viewer node. So let's look at this vector scope. So the vector scope, for those who aren't familiar, so this is in the image editor. If you open the side tab with the N key, there's a scopes tab. There's the histogram waveform that's pretty familiar for those that are used to Photoshop. But the vector scope, it shows your hues and the saturation of them. It even marks common colors like green, yellow, red, magenta, where they are on the vector scope. But you'll notice from the Render Raw, even though I used the Chronos PBR, it's still not as saturated as I want, and it's not really pointing to red as it should be. This is partially because the area lamp above it is cooler. You can kind of see that it's more of a blue color down here. So I want to be able to shift just this M&M more towards red. So thankfully, I can do that with the hue correct. So with hue correct, you can see now it's more towards red and it's much more saturated. Now, how did I make sure that only the M&M was changed? Now I did use the alpha for the DJ view layer, came in handy, but it doesn't work by itself because there's lens distortion. So if I turn off the lens distortion, you can see that you see that it doesn't quite get to the edge as it should. And so I actually copy and pasted the render raw lens distortion group node out here so that way it would distort the matte correctly. And again, this was done after the competition because previously I was just using the hue saturation tweaks over here, which initially worked well, but it kind of messed some of the colors in other areas. And so I wanted to be able to tweak this a little more precisely. And that's it, that's render. I hope you really like this. It's kind of a different way of showing my process after the fact. I was also surprised of how few add-ons I used. I accidentally launched Blender with nearly all my add-ons disabled. I have multiple launchers, by the way. So I have a prep tutorial launcher for Blender. I was actually wanting to do this as part of a tutorial in the future. Let me know in the comments if you want custom launchers for Blender. But it led me to realize of like which add-ons I actually needed and really use during my process. So the main ones I used, there was a few that were mine. I actually didn't use Light Painter this time, believe it or not. But I did use color from material viewport color from nodes, so that's one of mine. I used render raw, of course. And then what was the other ones I used? I didn't use frame flip. I was thinking about it. That's one of my ones I haven't released. I did use Proxy Plus, as I showed you. I generated the proxies, but that was it. I didn't even really use any other of my add-ons or others' add-ons. Obviously, I love add-ons. Obviously, I code them. I made a whole course about coding your first add-on, link in the description. But I think it's very important as a beginner, even as an advanced user, to at least go through the process manually at least once at some point. So that way you know if you do need to use an add-on, you know the value of the add-on. And if the add-on becomes deprecated, it's no longer maintained, or just breaks, you at least know a workaround in the heat of the moment, so that way you know at least how to fix things worst case. So this is me walking through my M&M render. Hope you find this insightful, kind of touches on some things from the optimization series. Let me know if you like this video format. I do enjoy doing kind of more casual renders like this and kind of showing the process after the fact. Thank you for watching and happy blending.